Much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's always a great pleasure to follow the member for Solomon, somebody who was a very successful businesswoman in her own right, and she knows, Mr Deputy Speaker, that Australian businesses thrive when government gets out of their way, and to paraphrase that great quote, it is often a case of government being the problem rather than government having the solution. So we are very lucky on this side of the House to have very successful business people in the private sector, and we bring that wisdom to this place to discuss bills like we are debating here tonight. This government promised a deregulation agenda that would slash at least $1 billion in red and green tape every year. And Mr Deputy Speaker, we are more than delivering. This year we've doubled on that commitment, with hundreds of millions of dollars in compliance costs removed in our first of our dedicated repeal days in March, and our autumn repeal day removed more than 10,000 pieces and 50,000 pages of redundant, unnecessary, burdensome legislation and regulation. Now, together with the second of our repeal days, the government has hit that $2 billion target. On the 22nd of October, the government introduced legislation and tabled an instrument to repeal a further 1,000 pieces and more than 7,200 pages of legislation and regulation. The autumn and spring repeal days bring the total net deregulatory savings so far to more than $2.1 billion. Mr Deputy Speaker, the aim of this unflinching, whole-of-government commitment to repeal of costly and utterly frustrating legislation and regulation is to get government out of the way, to streamline our lives, so that businesses can especially free their arms, breathe and grow again. That means a stronger economy and more jobs for Australians. The bill we are debating, the Treasury Legislation Amendment, the Repeal Day Bill 2014, is another important step towards this uncluttering of bureaucratic excess. We are a government that wants to see enterprise succeed. We are a government that wants to see employers advance with confidence and certainty and, frankly, just to get on with doing the business that they do so well. Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill contains a number of measures that will improve and simplify laws around taxation, superannuation and shareholdings in certain financial sector companies. In summary, they repeal payslip reporting provisions in superannuation law that would have added another layer of regulatory burden on employers above and beyond the current requirements enshrined in the Fair Work legislation. They simplify taxation laws by removing or consolidating redundant and replicated provisions and shifting long-established regulations into the primary law. They cut back the regulatory burden on associates of individuals seeking to obtain a shareholding of more than 15% in certain financial sector companies, and they rewrite the definition of Australia into a single location in the tax law so that it can be applied across all tax laws for ease and clarity. Mr Deputy Speaker, the previous Labor government red tape legacy is well documented. I've spoken about it many times in this place, but once again for the public record. The former Labor government saw 40 new or increased taxes and more than 21,000 new regulations. We are untangling the mess that has enveloped our businesses, our schools and our hospitals, a mess that has stifled productivity and outcomes and led costs being passed on to every single Australian. And so it is that Labor's intention to introduce more crippling regulations, regulations specifying that employers would have to report on pay slips the amount of superannuation contributions and the date on which the employer expects to pay them, will now be thrown into the very large red tape bonfire. The government will repeal provisions from the superannuation law that would have allowed the previous government to give effect to this change, a change that would have placed more costly, time-consuming and altogether unnecessary onus on employers. Mr Deputy Speaker, this repeal will in no way alter the information employees currently receive on their payslip with regards to superannuation contributions. Under the Fair Work Act, employers are already required to at least report details of employees' superannuation entitlements, that have occurred during the pay period on an employee's payslip. If employers were suddenly required to report actual contributions and payment dates, the major updates to their software would be costly and for a period at least disruptive. And for what tangible benefits from the perspective of employees? Little to none, I would think, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is a fact that most employers pay their superannuation. It is also a fact that the Australian Tax Office investigates every complaint received about unpaid superannuation. Its risk analysis and intelligence work means the ATO knows who to target in terms of high-risk industries and employers. Mr Deputy Speaker, mind-numbing duplication was a hallmark of the previous Labor administration. Weaving one's way through a maze of technicality and detail to get a straight answer and a simple solution proved time and time again to be a headache for businesses in my electorate under the government of those members opposite. It is any wonder that this time 2 years ago, small business startups under Labor had dropped by 95%, and the number of businesses going bankrupt had risen by 48%. At that point, there were 11,000 fewer small businesses employing people than there were in 2007. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, this government, in just 12 months, is turning the ship around. In Longman, confidence is returning to the local economy, with businesses from Caboolture to Narangba hiring new workers. And the phenomenon is in no small part fanned by the government's demolition on red tape. Another key measure in this bill simplifies the taxation laws by consolidating duplicated taxation administration provisions contained in various taxation acts into a single location in a single act. This measure also repeals spent or redundant taxation laws and relocates long-standing regulations to within the primary law. Mr Deputy Speaker, existing tax law is complex, verging on the impenetrable, and makes at times costly compliance demands. However, these changes will result in a material reduction in the size of the taxation laws, with 1 or 2 sections replacing in excess of over 50 existing provisions. Currently, if a taxpayer seeks to clarify his or her rights in relation to information the Commissioner of Taxation has the power to obtain, they must navigate across 10 different acts. These amendments will put an end to that, with all relevant material contained within Schedule 1 of the Taxation Administration Act. Mr Deputy Speaker, wherever possible, cleaning up our tax laws so that their integrity is uncompromised while becoming more accessible and involving less user time and cost should be a priority of the government. It is, as I can assure you, a priority of this government. Indeed, the changes in this bill are perhaps, above all, just plain sensible. Mr Deputy Speaker, as such, they stand in stark contrast to the 6 years of insufferable Labor overregulation and misadministration. Mr Deputy Speaker, as I mentioned, the unwinding of red tape is already resulting in real bottom-line results for the businesses of my local region. A case in point is Packer Leather, an iconic leather manufacturing firm locally that is a supplier of leather for Kookaburra cricket balls and Sharon footballs. Packer Leather had been forced to pay up to $20,000 to get an imported chemical approved by Australian regulators for use in the tanning process, despite these chemicals already having met very difficult international standards. After I took up the case with the member for Kooyong and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, the government will now require the National Industrial Chemicals Notification and Assessment Scheme, or NICNAS, to increase its acceptance of risk assessments made by reputable international authorities such as the European Union regulator. In short, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is just another victory for common sense. The removing of expensive and time-consuming reapprovals in Australia will help put Managing Director Lindsay Packer on a level footing with his international rivals. Packer Leather is a truly global act, even producing the leather for gloves worn by some of the world's top racing drivers. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to thank the Parliamentary Secretary for visiting Longman, where he spoke to local businesses, duly noted their red tape concerns and then took action. He understands, better than anyone in this place, how bad regulation and over-regulation hurts productivity, deters investment and innovation, and ultimately costs jobs. With the help of his hard work, the government is righting the wrongs of the former Labor government. In shedding billions of dollars of obstructionist red tape, we are unshackling our businesses, industry and communities, and pointing them on a path to prosperity. That is what these bills seek to do, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I commend them to the House.